Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Automating Material Code Change Detection and Response for Continuous Compliance. We're excited you could join us. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I'll be moderating today's event. Today, we are going to deep dive into material code change detection and response and how it supports continuous compliance. We are thrilled to be joined by our speaker, Idan Plotnik, co-founder and CEO at Apiro. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please know we do capture all questions. So to kick us off, I'd like to ask our speaker to briefly introduce himself and their work. So Idan.
Thank you very much, Megan. Thank you for having me. So I'm Idan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Apiro. More than 20 years in the cybersecurity industry. Lastly, I was a GM for software engineering at Microsoft before we started Apiro. And I felt the challenges of embedding risk management, application security processes and tools into the development lifecycle, which in most cases stop developers, which means stop the business from delivering value faster to our customers. And today we will cover how we can solve this business problem for CIOs and CISOs together.
Wonderful. Thank you. Glad you could be here. So let's start with a topic that I'm sure you can discuss in great detail. Why is materiality in software development such a challenging topic?
Sure. Yes, it's not an easy question, but I will try to give the gist of the challenge. So first and foremost, in the last, I think, 6+ years, we see more and more adoption of CI/CD pipelines and agile development, which exponentially increase the amount of code changes and releases to production. Before agile, there were risk assessment questionnaires where you as a software development team needs to go through to be able to assess the risk and understand which processes, which tools needs to run on the code that you write. And there is just a clash between the agility and you want to move faster and faster versus the manual processes. So materiality in software development is connected directly to risk management. And we need the ability to automate this piece. And so we will not be relying on manual risk assessment questionnaires, which is based on self-attestation. And if a developer or development team leader is saying, I don't have PII data in my code base, and you do, you have a compliance breach. And this is a serious issue for software companies today. And a few weeks ago, CISA released a secure software development attestation form that CEOs and COOs needs to sign before they release code to their customers. It's a serious issue. And risk management needs to be integrated into the SDLC processes.
Excellent. Thank you. And before we go any further, can we talk about agile development and its impact on risk?
Sure. So think about that. Agile means that I'm getting in a very fast paced. I'm getting more and more requirements or new requirements or changes to existing capabilities from our customers. I need to quickly assess it and write code that will solve these requests as fast as we can. And it means change the architecture of the application. It means add more data models. It means changing APIs and other core components to be able to support more and more value to our customers. This is simple software development. And again, if you see how risk people managing the risks, they're asking these questions like, did you change the authentication mechanism? Did you change the sensitivity of the data that you have? Did you added a new Gen AI framework so we can assess it? And it's changing in such a fast pace. And this is, I think, the reason why detecting it is so important, detecting the materiality of the change, and then augment on top of that, of the materiality, a risk assessment or automated risk assessment, so it will be aligned with the pace of Agile is so important to the business.
Excellent, thank you. And with this in mind, how should financial institutions that are determined to move quickly when developing and deploying code think about materiality?
So every financial organization takes the frameworks out there, and translate them into their own security controls. This is a real heavy process that is updated on, I want to say, quarterly basis, because there are new controls and you need to make sure we are not in a breach to these controls. And the challenge is, because you have so many interpretations to these controls, you eventually need to codify them. Because again, think about a control. You cannot, I'm going to the simplest ones. You can't use this type of security controls like authentication or encryption in your code. Now, if you will not codify them and you will stay with the same modus operandi of changing the question in the questionnaire and rely on humans to tell you if it's true or not, while it's changing, the code is changing on a daily basis, it doesn't make any sense. So you need to be able to take these controls, codify them in an engine that will analyze the code for every code commit and say, one, is this code commit contains material changes? If so, does these controls imply on this material change? And if not, what's the risk appetite and what's the risk threshold? Because if you pass the risk threshold, now it's, or we need to automatically trigger a threat model or a security review or a penetration test or a compliance review without bothering people and ask them to answer these questionnaires, because eventually it's time that costs money to the business. You distract the developers from building or writing or developing code which goes directly to business outcome. And I think this is a huge business challenge, and not only a technical challenge for these financial organizations. I can tell you that this is one of the core intellectual property that we developed at Apiro, to be able to scan every code commit to every branch, automatically identify the materiality of the change, automatically assess if this change is breaching a security controls that we want to implement, and what's the overall risk score of this code repository or application, and based on that make automated or automatically make the decision of what's the next step before deploying to production. Because it's all, as I said, the risk management should be before you deploy your application to the cloud. This is secure by default, secure by design, and this is, today manually, and the challenge is to automate it like we implemented agile and CI/CD practices across. By the way, every financial organization already adopted agile and CI/CD and delivering code on a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
Great, thank you. So how do developers view materiality? What does that viewpoint mean for the rest of the organization?
The short answer, they don't care. And so because look at the three-headed monster that we have here, okay? We have the risk management people that are not super technical, great on taking the frameworks, the regulatory frameworks, and translate them into controls. We have the developers that doesn't understand risk management, and it's not part of their job to manage the risk. The part of the job, they get paid to be able to provide more features, more business value, and with high quality. And then we have the application security engineers, which a little bit like they do understand risk management, but not into like the depth that the risk management officer understand. And they do understand a little bit the code. So we need to bridge between three different personas that are talking at different languages and has different interests and different responsibilities on a their day-by-day job. So it's a huge challenge how we bridge between them. And this is the only way that you can eventually explain developers why materiality and why risk management is so important to the business. Because they do care about the code quality, but code quality is same as security quality of the code, which eventually impacts the risk assessment and the risk management processes in the organization. Because, by the way, risk management is also if you're in the feature that you developed is not has has a performance implications, same as it has a security implications. So risk assessment and risk management is a multi-dimensional thing with a lot of factors in it. We the people that understand risk management always talk in likelihood factors and impact factors. And both of these factors can take into consideration the quality of the code that you develop and the security of the code that you develop and the privacy of the code that you develop. So we are trying, what we manage to do in large financial organizations is to translate the security control into a simple message to a developer in their own tool chain. So they don't need to open a new UI, and they don't need to be trained on a new system. When they open a pull request, in the pull request, we can tell them, these are the security controls that you have a breach or you are not following. And these are the implications of not following these security controls to the business. So now when we take a developer and we explain to him or her in a very simple wording, what are the implications of the code that he or she developed on the business, and what is the next step that they need to do. Talk with Megan on that or with Idan on the other process that you need to do, and you help them go through the process of solving this problem, then this is the magic. This is where developers care about the materiality and the risk of the code that they own. Hopefully, I know it's a long answer, but hopefully it makes sense.
No, I think it's very well said. Thank you. So, we have defined materiality and the challenges organizations face in managing risk. So, in practical terms, as changes occur to the code, how do we identify material changes and vulnerabilities?
Yeah, by the way, I think vulnerabilities and material changes are two different paths to go. They all start from a feature request, which initiate a code change. From a code change, it can be or a vulnerability or a material change. Um, but both of them, vulnerabilities and material changes, are important for the risk assessment process. Um, so you asked about how. I think detecting vulnerabilities is kind of commodity. Okay, you have secrets in code, open source vulnerabilities, application level vulnerabilities, and others vulnerabilities. You have so many tools out there. It's commodity. Um, I think the core intellectual property of what we build is one, to ingest all these vulnerabilities, contextualize them with a deep understanding of the code and the inventory that we build. But on the other hand, is to scan the code and detect material changes. So this is a totally different approach from other code scanning tools out there. As you said, these tools detect vulnerabilities. We developed a technology based on AI and based on a domain knowledge and an engine that we developed. Yes, it uses static code analysis, it uses text analysis and other technical capabilities, but the outcome is different because first and foremost, you need to translate code into entities. What does it mean? It means that you need to scan code and understand that this is a RESTful API. You need to understand code or scan code and understand that this is an authentication framework and this is an authentication logic. And here you have a logging framework like Log4j, and it's connected to the same API that we found. So scanning code, translate it into entities, and build a graph of all the connection between these entities. This is the first step that we automatically do for every code commit across all the history pipeline. The second technology that we developed is say, okay, Megan changed the logic of this sensitive API that exposes PII data in a high business impact application. Now let's let's trigger a process. Let's tell her in the pull request while she commit the code. So basically, this is the core value of mapping so many frameworks in the code, so many different patterns in the code, and understand the entities and the changes on top of them. This is what we developed to help, by the way, not only large financial organizations that are using Apiro for this use case, but also other large enterprises that are not in the financial industry, but cannot keep up with the pace of agile development and CI/CD pipeline and the fast delivery to the cloud, and wants to catch these risks early in the development process and automate the manual processes for risk assessment, threat models, penetration testing, and other processes that they are doing today. So just to make a long story short, It's scanning the code, identifying the entities, connect them on a graph, and then be able to identify what is a material change. And every organization can codify and change what materiality means for their organization, their business unit, their specific code repository with intellectual property to their organizations. So they can use Apiro to codify the materiality and based on our engine, trigger the process and not just rely on what Apiro thinks that materiality is.
Excellent. Thank you. So there's a process for financial institutions to follow when addressing vulnerabilities and material changes. Can you share a little more about your recommended approach?
Yes, so there are specific requirements in PCI 4 and NIST and other frameworks that explicitly saying that you need to inventory all the changes, all the material changes that happens in the organization and in your development organization. And you need not only to inventory the changes, you need to connect between the feature request that initiated in, for example, Jira, to the code commit, to the material change, to the developer, and prove me as an auditor that it's not only that you inventory the material changes, you will tell me which processes you ran on these material changes. Who reviewed them? Who approved them? When they were deployed and to where? Did it pass through staging to production or not? Is it passed through a pen testing or a threat model? So you need, as an organization, not our recommendation is the compliance frameworks mandate that you need to inventory all these material changes and track them and provide evidence to the auditors across from the moment you design, code, and deliver this feature to the cloud. You need to be able to answer these questions in a very fast pace.
Perfect. Thank you. And can the approach that you've outlined apply to large financial institutions?
Yes. I'm not sure, large can, everyone can think about large financial institutions in a different way. I can tell you that we have even smaller financial organizations that responsible for money transfer or cryptocurrency or other stuff that they're also using Apiro for this use case. But it's a mandate for large enterprise. Any financial organization out there must follow the SEC regulations and standards and implement these security controls and inventory the changes. So the short answer is it's for every large financial organization, the answer is yes, but not only. I see, and I'm talking to CISOs on a weekly basis, I see more and more financial organizations from small to medium to large adopting the automation of inventory their changes and inventory what they have in the code bases and across their pipelines to connect the dots to be able to comply with these regulatory frameworks like NIST and CIS and PCI 4 and others.
Excellent. Thank you. I'd like to close our discussion today with your final thoughts on best practices for financial institutions to adopt when it comes to compliance, data security, and the need to respond to competitive pressures.
So I think everything starts from visibility. If you don't have visibility to what you have in your code bases and in your pipelines, and what's the knowledge of the developers, and what's the risk of the based on the data that you have in the code repository, it's a huge, huge challenge, and it's just a rubber stamp um, to compliance. And you cannot rely on, as I said, you cannot rely anymore on these manual risk assessment to be able to comply with regulatory standards. And because of agile and different responsibility in the organization from the moment you design code and deliver it, and you have different systems, it's so hard to collect all these data. So my recommendation, if you will ask me only one, is to be able to aggregate all the data from a deep code analysis. I will one step before even to the feature requests and deeply understand what you have in your ticketing systems, to what you have in the code bases and in your code repositories, to the CI/CD pipelines that actually build and deliver the code to the cloud. Connect these three steps and be able to ask questions or complex questions across these data points. This is the fundamental. And I see more and more regulators asking this capability from the financial organizations, and they don't have it. Like, they build their own like homegrown CMDB systems that goes back to the fundamental problem. You ask me question before I start to develop a new application or changing an existing one. I'm answering I answer the risk assessment questionnaire, but no one actually validates what I wrote in my code, and if it's aligned with the questions that I put in the risk assessment questionnaire. And the answers to the risk assessment questionnaires builds the inventory and that creates the evidence to the auditors. And this is the root cause of the challenge of managing risk at the pace of agile development and CI/CD. And I see more and more regulators pushing large financial organizations to have a real-time inventory of everything that they develop.
Great, Idan, thank you so much. We do have some time left, so I'd love to shift to some questions from our audience. Just to jump right in, it says we struggle with prioritizing the remediation of vulnerabilities. The volume and complexity of vulnerabilities and a lack of resources mean we're always behind. Can you share some best practices to help us catch up?
Sure, absolutely. And before I will dive into the details here, because it's a very good question, I want to explain that most of the vulnerability management tools out there, they see only the vulnerabilities, but they don't understand the code. They don't understand the changes. And when you want to manage a risk, like fixing vulnerabilities is not the challenge, because not every vulnerability is a risk to your business. One vulnerability with CVSS score or EPSS, high EPSS score, can be in your organization low risk, and in my organization high risk. So what I'm trying to say is, if you want to manage risk and not manage vulnerabilities, you need to deeply understand the code. You need to understand changes plus vulnerabilities, and then combine the assessment together. So to make a long story short, to your question, I can give a concrete example of how you prioritize a vulnerability based on likelihood and impact factors from deeply understanding the code. So let's take, for example, a Log4j. Okay, everyone knows Log4j was a huge challenge for every organization out there to prioritize it. If I have a log4j in a repository with PII data, the impact is much higher. If the log4j is actually deployed and internet exposed, the likelihood of exploitability is much higher. If this log4j is being used by an API that responsible for a money transfer process in my bank, it's much higher impact. So now I need to calculate the log4j or any other vulnerability or any other secret in code or any other SQL injection based on these likelihood and impact factors. And today, it's a manual process. And it's a manual process because these vulnerability management tools does not understand the code and does not understand the development processes. And I think this is the key, and I will try to say it in one sentence. When you come and you try to prioritize vulnerabilities, list all the likelihood and impact factors and ask yourself, how can I automate the likelihood and the impact factors for every vulnerability? And if I understand the code while I'm doing it. This is my tip.
Thank you. Our next question asks, how do I convince developers, AppSec, and risk management that we need to embrace yet another security-related tool? Also, what should I include in a business case to justify the investment?
Wow. Okay, so I will start from the first question about why do I need, or how I convince developers. So again, it's such a complex question because these are three different personas with three different views on the world, okay? And you need to try to bridge the gap with a common language. So first and foremost, I would ask them, how many releases were stopped from reaching your cloud or from reaching production environment because of risk issues? And I think the answer is almost every release is stopped because of this vulnerability or this process, like findings from pen test, or you didn't comply with this control, but guess what? I did comply. So I think eventually when you say this is a pure cost saving and time saving solution, then they open up and say, how? Show me how you do that. Because today I'm not efficient and I'm not effective in the way I develop and deliver code to the cloud. So it's not that my development processes and best practices are not good. They're great. I'm doing code reviews, I'm doing agile design reviews, great. But I'm getting into the pipeline and someone blocks me because I didn't answer a question, or I did answer a question, but it's not comply with the controls that I have for this application. We need to automate. And I think at the moment we talk about, these are the amount of code commits that you did or commit this last month. Only 30% of them are with material changes. Only 5% of the material changes are actually risky. You prove it in the data. You prove how much time I can save you on reviewing these things and automatically assess the risk. So you will not get to the build pipeline or deployment pipeline, and now someone blocks you without any context. And And you as an agile development team, you already moved to the next 50 features that I need to deliver in my next sprint, okay? Which I move to another context. So developers doesn't want to move from one context to another back and forth. This is a pure data-driven conversation. We can show it in the data. How many commits, how many material changes, how many of them are risky, and this is how we and one more thing that is super important, we tell to the developers, we are not going to introduce you a new tool. So we will connect into your existing tool chain, and we will help you. We will prioritize it automatically, and we will help you remediate it with remediation action suggestions, and who is the relevant code owner or who is the relevant risk owner for this process. So we cut down the time that you need to find these people as a developer and ask around, how can I solve it so no one will stop me from delivering the code that I already developed to production.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next question asks, can you share more information about your use of AI? Can it provide real-time feedback to developers?
Sure. So we were using AI before it was, a buzz that everyone are saying AI. I think four years ago. We are using AI for multiple purposes. We're using, by the way, not only AI, because the people in the audience that understand how much data you need, and you need to train it on, code base and text and text, and in most cases the public code bases that we have are not, or doesn't look like code bases of large financial organizations, so the models are not accurate. So it's a huge challenge, but we're using it for multiple purposes. As I said, one is to be able to identify material changes, to translate code into entities, and also to provide remediation actions that are contextual to what we know about the code and the developer knowledge and activity throughout the history. So just to take code and give it to an LLM engine or model and get an answer back is not enough. The LLM needs to understand what's the business impact, what are the technologies that are being used, and what are the processes that this code went through. So this is how, in a nutshell, we are using AI in Apiro. By the way, one more thing, maybe because it's kind of new, and we just released it to GA, is our ability to detect Gen AI technologies in our customer code bases, which is a huge part of the risk assessment process. So last thing on AI is our ability to identify all the Gen AI frameworks and usage in our customers' environments or code bases. Okay, this is a huge challenge for risk management teams. Why? Because with the rise of ChatGPT and the risks around these models, now every risk management or risk assessment questionnaire ask the developers if they're using any frameworks like that, and if it's related to a sensitive data like PII that we as a bank or a financial organization process. So they don't need to do it anymore. In Apiro, you can automatically manage the risk around every Gen AI technology, and you can put guardrails or governance and policies on top of it and say, if you have a repository with PII data that uses Gen AI with an internet-facing API, This is a risk that needs to manage or go through an automatic review or pen test or stuff like that. So this is how we use AI, but also detect AI usage in our detect and manage the risk of Gen AI technologies in our customers' code bases.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next question says, as an organization just getting started with this, what's a good first step in trying to limit or prevent material changes?
So I think the first one is to understand what is your risk appetite. Okay. Um, you need, and to do that, you need an automatic risk assessment and visibility. And it goes back to the core components of ASPM, Application Security Posture Management, to get visibility. But it's not just visibility to the application infrastructure, it's visibility of what you have inside the code bases. So what we did in Apiro to help our customers, just to answer this question, is connect to your source control managers via read-only API, and between an hour to 2 hours, we automatically assess the risk of every repository based on what is the sensitivity of the data, what's the knowledge and the activities of the developers, which frameworks and technologies are being used, which sensitive APIs do you have, how many vulnerabilities, and what is the velocity and the risk of the material changes for every code repository. This is the fundamental thing that I can recommend customers in the financial industry to do, and be able to ask complex questions on this, let's call it visibility capability. Okay. When you have that, you can focus, because there are thousands of, it depends on the size of the organization and the number of developers. You can have 100,000s of changes on a daily basis, in some cases on an hourly basis. Okay. So without having the visibility, the real-time visibility, you can't move to the next step. So the next step is to take or understand the risk appetite and define these risk thresholds on top of the visibility. And the risk appetite and the threshold is driven from the security controls. So when you have that in place, codified on top of the ability to identify in an automatic manner these material changes, this is the high maturity level that you can reach and see business outcome. But again, my recommendation is you must start with deep visibility that has a real-time component for everything that changes in your code bases, assess the risk, and then apply the controls on top of it.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next question asks, how can you get teams to care about materiality?
So it goes back to your question, or the first question, so I will not elaborate on that. I think maybe the second question on how to convince developers to that materiality is important for them. And I think it's like, as I said earlier, it's like quality. Quality and security and the changes in their materiality are part of a risk assessment process. And I think if it comes from a compliance requirements that you need to comply with, then it's the easiest thing to do, and you don't need to get them care about it. They must do that. But in my conversation with developers, I'm just saying, you're wasting so much time on the manual stuff. And eventually someone blocks you from delivering your code. You're proud of your code and you want to show value to the organization that you're working at. And this is how we are taking two different dimensions. Or you need to comply with a regulatory framework before you release to production, or just talking about efficiency and productivity and effectiveness of the development lifecycle.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question says, can you detect these kinds of changes with AST tools?
The short answer is no. And I will, without going into the details of the technology, yes, AST tools and the ability to detect material changes, the foundation is static code analysis and data flow analysis, but it's not enough. We also added a text analysis on top of it. And eventually, AST tools are aimed to run detection rules on top of the understanding of the code to be able to comply with OWASP top 10, like SQL injection or other stuff. But they're not, their entire purpose or design was not to translate code into entities, store these entities in an inventory, build a graph to connect all these entities, and eventually run the static analysis to identify a logic of a material change. This is a different detection on top of, I will say, semi-technology that detects vulnerabilities. Does this make sense?
Yeah, well said. I think we've got time for one more question, so we'll end with this one. Can this information be used to help our compliance or GRC teams, and how?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a reporting mechanism. GRC teams are not into the weeds of the source code and identify they don't understand code. So they need a report that will provide them what's the coverage of their code bases for, a specific regulatory frameworks, and which processes runs on which material changes. So the short answer is absolutely yes. And again, we did the same drill with the developers. If you are a GRC manager and you are using your own, tools, we will ingest the data to your own tools, or your own tools can query the data from Apiro, or you can use Apiro to generate the reports. So we are an open and deep ASPM platform that allows both developers, or the three of them, developers, application security engineers, and risk and GRC people, to get value immediately without stopping the development teams to deliver business value faster.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That is all the time that we have today. I'd like to thank our speaker again, Idan Plotnik, for a great discussion. We appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us. I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.